So just looking back historically, when Alistair and Jean Carruthers noted that when patients were being treated for strabismus and blepharospasm, they had a reduction of frown lines. The original work being done by a pioneering ophthalmologist in San Francisco by the name of Alan Scott. But interestingly, in the UK, Dysport was being developed by another pharmaceutical company, much smaller. Had the British been quite as entrepreneurial and as good a developers as the US, we might have all been talking about being dysported rather than being Botoxed. But anyway, that's by the by. Now, it has been, as I said, one of the biggest financial successes in aesthetics. And if you look back into the 90s when we first started using type A toxins and comparing it to today, the growth of use has been enormous. One of the great things that's often discussed is how interchangeable are botulinum toxin type A units. And the answer is that they're really not, and I do think it's worthwhile. There's no reason why you can't use one or the other, but my suggestion is for the people who are starting up, get familiar with the actual doses and dilutions that you are going to use and be comfortable with. Difficult to avoid bruising at times with Botox. So we started using this AccuVein vein viewer, where we can actually highlight where those veins are, and it's actually very useful. I've found it quite helpful. I don't use it on everybody, but if it's a Botox bruiser or a filler bruiser, I will use this to draw out the surface veins, which you sometimes can't see, to reduce bruising. Acquired Botox resistance, is it relevant in aesthetics? Well, it is in a small percentage, and it's a small percentage because we actually don't inject the huge amounts of units that neurologists do. Much more common in neurology. We did a study where we identified 5 in about 2,000 patients that we saw over 2,500 patients that we saw over 2 years that became resistant to all of the 3 type A toxins that we had available. And so we took 5 of those patients and investigated them further and injected, after proving that they were type A resistant, with type B, and they responded to the type B. And the problem with the people starting off with these injections is be careful on the lower face. It's much less forgiving, the side effects last longer, it's much more difficult to correct a screw up. Lower facial muscles are much more complex. It's one of the areas that you can get quite long-lasting deformity, really, and the patients are not happy. And it's one of the areas where I will still occasionally use, if I'm dealing with somebody with lower facial asymmetry, I will use my recording EMG machine. Last but one slide, Botox is in development. There are several. Revance topical, RT00, probably 302 is by injection. Is it longer acting? Further studies are needed. So finally, remember combinations. I always try and strive for a natural look, and you can really, with the appropriate toxin, the appropriate filler, the appropriate laser, the appropriate radio frequency, transform people elegantly and without surgery. Thanks.